On a Saturday night in September of 1989, then 19-year-old Valerie Stevens kissed her baby daughter goodnight and stepped out of her Toronto apartment, planning to meet a friend for a night of dancing at a downtown club. On the way, something seemed to have gone terribly wrong. It doesn't seem as though Valerie made it to the club. In fact, she was never seen alive again. The mystery of what happened was only partially solved 3 years later when hunters stumbled upon her remains nearly 100 kilometers away from where she was last seen. Valerie's death was ruled a homicide, yet the case was never solved and has long gone cold. But there is someone who refuses to give up. That infant she left behind, Robyn, is now an adult, raising a family of her own and still searching for answers related to the death of that mother she never got a chance to know. In this episode, we're going to explore the story through the eyes of Valerie's daughter. Robyn Stevens is going to join me to talk about her search for truth, tell us about the day she learned the devastating secret her family had been keeping from her, and tell us what it's like to grow up in the shadow of a cold case. This is a story about loss, resilience, and a lifelong pursuit of justice. Our topic is the murder of Valerie Stevens.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
So, Robyn, just to start, why don't you introduce yourself, tell me a bit about your life today, and whatever you feel like sharing about present day Robyn Stevens.
Yeah, absolutely, Jordan. So I am a mother of three. I have a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 5-year-old. I love being a mom. It's like top tier, what I was made for. I am also a children's author. I had published 2 books, more on the way. And I currently, for the past few years, have worked in the medical office admin / a little bit of nursing. So that's a little bit about me and what I.
You sound very busy because on top of all of this, you're also pursuing information about your family history. And I won't put words in your mouth, but it seems like a part of your mission is, I guess, truth and justice related to a story that you play a role in that you only learned about later in life. So let's just jump right into it. When was it that you learned that the start of your life was much more difficult than the average person? When did you learn about your mother's murder?
So growing up, I had always kind of questioned my parents and other family members of why I look different than my dad. My parents are a biracial couple,
Hmm.
and I do not look biracial. My brothers that I was raised with are much older, and of course, they look biracial. So those kind of differences is kind of what made me started digging into this. I would say I'd start asking questions around 10.
Okay.
Um,
And was it you that was noticing this, or did maybe friends would say, like, you look a lot different than your brothers, and they're a lot older,
it was
or
me. Yeah, it was just some things weren't kind of adding up, I guess you can say.
Mhm. Yeah, it's almost how as kids, when they're 6, 7, 8, they start realizing like kind of the story of Santa Claus doesn't really make sense. And you kind of had a similar experience, but with something much more deeper and profound when you're, 10, 11, and 12. How did you learn that your mom and dad raising you wasn't your biological mother, and that you had this kind of dark family history that you had been kept away from up until this point in your life?
Yeah, so there was okay, I want to first say that before I was told about my adoption and about my biological mother, me and my mother that raised me, which is biologically my great aunt, and my father is my great uncle.
Okay.
Um, we would always go to my great grandmother and grandfather's house, help with chores, and they were elders. Um, I went there every single weekend growing up in Toronto. And one day I went into their bedroom and I saw a photo on the bookshelf. And I turned to my mom and I was like, oh, I never seen this before. Who's she? It was a younger woman holding a baby. Her face went like pale and she kind of turned her back and she was like, oh, that's your cousin. I'm like, well, what had happened to her? Like, have I met her? He's like, yeah, but when you were young, like you were a baby. I'm like, what happened to her? She's like, oh, she died. I'm like, is that her daughter in the picture? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's really sad. I'm sorry, I never heard about this. So fast forward then to maybe about a year after that, me and my parents, we lived in Mississauga, Ontario, and I was in the basement watching TV, chilling. I'm 13 years old at this time,
Mhm.
grade 8, about to go into grade 9, start high school. And my parents called me upstairs. And so I went up. My first reaction was, what did I do? Am I in trouble? And my dad was like, no, surprisingly not. Do you want to have a seat? We need to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So we sat down at the dinner table. It was just me and my parents. And my dad sat across from me, and my mom was to my right. And he ended up sliding a picture over and turning it around facing me. And when I looked at the picture, I could not believe it. It took a minute to connect, but it was the same picture that I had seen at my great grandparents' house about a year prior.
Wow.
And he said, do you know who this is? And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, Helen, which was my biological mom's like one of her closest cousins.
Mhm.
And he's like, no. I'm like, no, I have no idea. And then he's just like, this is your biological mother. And she ended up going missing, and they ended up finding her in the woods about 3 years after. And we don't know who did it. And it's still an investigation. And we had kept this from you because we wanted to make sure you were emotionally and mentally mature enough to comprehend the complexity of the situation. And I feel like I kind of like blacked out.
Even you describing it, I can feel like myself shutting down, like just imagining that moment. That must have been so intense for everybody at that table, because I can only imagine your mom and dad who raised you probably fought with this idea of like we eventually need to face this, like her past and include her in this. And I can only imagine that it was a tough decision whether, do we let her know as as she's growing up what, this dark story from her past, or do we put it off? And
Hmm.
what
Absolutely.
so they tell you this, and as like a 13-year-old, how do you remember how you reacted or how you felt?
Yeah, I felt like kind of confused. And I was
Mhm.
more so trying to reflect on the picture that was in front of me. And so I just remember saying after, I was just like, so are you my dad? Are you my real dad? And he was like, no, I'm not.
Wow.
And I'm like, and she's not my mom. And he's like, biologically, no. And then I was like, so you two aren't my actual parents? And I was like, okay. And right at that moment, my house phone rang and my mom got up and she picked up the phone and she was like, hello, hello, hello. And then she hung up. And it like, I didn't know it then, but looking back, it was kind of like a supernatural, like kind of thing. I
Weird.
more so took it as like my mom, like Valerie, was like, I'm here, it's me. It
Hmm.
was just really strange. And then throughout the past, like, little bit, I started connecting things. And, when I'm in school, my last name is this, but my biological name is that. And I remember being at the hospital with a broken ankle, and the nurse coming out and saying, Robyn Stevens. And my mom was like, hey, come on. I'm like, but they called the wrong name. That's not me. Wrong chart.
So you weren't raised as Robyn Stevens.
No, I was not. No, I
Okay.
was raised with my my adoptive parents last name. They never legally changed my last name.
Oh,
They just
okay.
kind of hid all my ID.
Because again, when you were a little kid, unless you had your health card or something, where would you really see your, like, government name?
No, exactly. My mom held on to all that, so I never seen it. I didn't really take it in until that time in the hospital. I just thought it was weird.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's how
But
I was told. And then, oh my gosh. And then so after being dropped that information, my dad was like, let's go to the movies. If you want, bring a friend. Let's go see a movie. And I was like, absolutely dissociated. And I was like, okay. So I went into the complex where we lived and I knocked on my friend's door, Teresa, and I was like, hey, we're going to the movies. Do you want to come? She's like, sure. So we knew her family because, as I had mentioned before, my dad was a minister
Mhm.
at a Christian church, and her family attended it from the time like I was little.
Okay.
So we went to the movies. We ended up seeing Jurassic Park, and then honestly, from then on, periodically, I have nightmares of dinosaurs chasing me in dreams.
Wow.
Connection, you know?
Well, that
So the movie, me and my friend went into the bathroom and I was like, oh my God, I gotta tell you something. And I was like, you won't believe what my parents told me. And I was like freaking out.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I'm adopted. And then she was like, yeah, I know. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, my parents told me. They said that one day that they didn't have you, and then the next day they did, and you were like 2 years old. And they said that they adopted you from a family member who went missing. And I was like, why didn't you ever tell me? And she was like, I wasn't allowed to. My parents would have killed me.
Whoa.
So we were both the same age. So understandable.
Just this idea of everyone knowing and it being kind of like a secret kept from you. I can only think that as a 13-year-old, though, there would have been a bit of like animosity or just some bad feelings from that. Did this change your relationship with your parents?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I also ended up finding out that my cousins are actually my second cousins, and my aunts and uncles are my great aunts and uncles, and my grandparents were my great grandparents. So everybody then played a different role
Yes,
biologically.
that's
And when I
right.
went
Yeah.
to my closest second cousin, he's 3 years younger, but we grew up like brother and sister.
Mm.
And I told him, I'm like, you won't fucking believe this. I'm adopted. He's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, "What do you mean you know? Who else knows?" And he's like, "Growing up, my mom would take me to Valerie Cemetery and we would lay flowers down." And I was like, "What?"
Wow.
So it definitely affected me. I was actually diagnosed in my early 20s with BPD, which is borderline personality disorder.
Mhm.
Um, Everybody shows different quote unquote symptoms differently. But it was definitely into around the time where I was told I was
I can
adopted.
only imagine the shock to your system, and in a way, like, it as you described there, it changes, it kind of the like, on paper, the relationship with different members of your family, but at the same time, I think that your family managed to, despite the tragedy that changed your family dynamic, at least you were kept within the family, and I say that because I think there are probably people listening who will disagree with your parents' decision to do that, but at the same time, I think any way that they handled this would have led to trauma to you as a young child. Like, I don't think there's any way to escape the trauma of having your mother murdered when you're an infant, and at some point you decide you wanna learn what happened to your mother. When does that happen? Like, when does it go from the shock of realizing that, everything's a little different than you thought it was, to what actually happened to Valerie? And I guess as we talk here, I'll call her your birth mother. Is that what you say, or biological mother?
Biological
Yeah.
mother, or you could call her Valerie.
Yeah.
Yes.
So at what point do you in your life do you become curious about what happened to your biological mother, Valerie?
I think once I was done being completely shell shocked,
Mhm.
it didn't really I didn't really start getting too curious until I was about, I would say, In my teens, I would say it really started around 17. I started asking more questions, asking family some questions. I asked one of my great aunts, like, hey, do you know who my real dad is? And she was like, no, sorry, I don't. But in my early 20s, she turned around and was like, yeah, I do. Here's his name. So it's like lie after lie,
Yeah,
secret after secret.
it's almost like at a point where you're like, just lay it all on me. My God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it began to be a lot. But I
Mhm.
really started digging into the facts and speaking with the detectives in my early 20s. I think I was about 20
Mhm.
once I started actually dipping my toes into the case.
And okay, and we'll get into that. But one thing that surprised me that you've said so far is just that when your parents sat you down to tell you, they probably told you more about what happened to your mom than I maybe would have expected. Like they could have maybe softened it a bit by just being like, when you were an infant or when you were a baby, your mom died and we raised you. They took it a step further to give you the basics of, she went missing, her body was found years later. We don't know who did this to her. So you knew it was a murder and foul play was involved, not, she got sick or in a car accident or something when you were a baby.
Absolutely. I definitely feel like my parents could have handled it better. I mean, they had all these years to kind of, rehearse what they were gonna say.
Mhm,
I feel like the way it was presented to me as well was traumatizing.
mhm.
Um, as well as, the whole finding out about my biological mom and all that
Y
stuff,
y
definitely.
Yeah, if like, I'm sure you've thought about this and you've probably been asked this, but in a perfect world, how would you have wanted or expected to learn about the dark story of your past?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I've had people my whole life asking me, like, would you have like wanted to know? Do you ever wish your parents would have just kept it from you? Um, I would say definitely no, because I was already kind of on to them.
Mhm,
Um, I do feel like there was a softer way to do it. Um, and definitely I feel like they could have told me younger
mhm,
and maybe told me stories or, be more creative with it and more
mhm,
gentle.
mhm,
And then one day I could have put the connection together like, oh, wait, is that little girl me? You know, um,
mhm,
something of that sort, because I feel like as an adoptee, um, you got to be really sensitive
mhm.
when you do come out with the truth. And it can be very traumatizing, even the way that it's presented.
Yeah, I can only imagine, but I will say, it seems like maybe your parents aren't great at, like, conflict in awkward situations, but and I say that because despite all this, right afterwards, they're like, "Let's go to the movies."
Yeah. Yeah, it
Uh,
was weird.
yeah, I hate to laugh at it, but it's just the going to Jurassic Park right after is just so unexpected.
I didn't even like Jurassic Park, my dad did. So, it was just really unexpected, it was a lot to take in, and I highly don't ever recommend anybody telling their kid about adoption in such a harsh sense of what my parents did. Definitely not.
So, at the time that your mom was murdered, at the time that your mom went missing, you were just a baby. I think you were like 16 months old or 19 months old?
I
18
was
months
about
old.
18 months old.
So, I guess the word for that would be like a toddler. What do you know about your life at this point in your mom's life? Like, because she was raising you as only a 19-year-old single mother. What do you know about your mom's life and your life as an infant?
I know that she did struggle with a lot of mental health, for herself. She was raised in um, a household where her dad was very abusive to her and
Mhm,
her brother. Um, and she had a lot of issues surrounding that growing up.
mhm,
I know she was a single mother. We lived in housing. We lived by the Science Center in North York, a really rough area,
mhm,
still is to this day. And I know that, like, she did try her best. I really do believe that. I do know, and I've never questioned her love for me, even to this day. A lot of family members have told me how she was with me, the way she parented me, how we were consistently kind of like glued together.
Mhm.
She didn't like trust me with babysitters, and she just wanted to bring me everywhere.
Yeah, I can only imagine how tough it is. I have nothing but respect for single mothers. Then when you have a 19-year-old single mother who's in housing in Toronto, that's hard work. And the fact that she was even able to keep things on track as long as she did at this point, impressive. And like I say, nothing but respect for her. And the events that lead to her disappearance seem to involve one of her first times, like kind of going out and going off on her own without you. Again, with her she's going to leave her baby, I believe, at her home with some friends who would be babysitting you. And when I say her baby, I'm talking about you. And she was planning to go out, and enjoy a night without her child. Tell me about what her plan was, or what you know about the night that your biological mother Valerie actually goes missing.
So it was September 9th, 1989 was the last time anybody had really witnessed her alive. She had left me with her longtime friend, Kathy, and Kathy's boyfriend, I think his name was Chris, and they were living with my mom in her townhouse on and off. I don't think they were living with her at that time, but she had left me in their care, and she was going to meet her friend Lynn at, I believe it was called the Diamond Club in Toronto, and they were supposed to go dancing. She ended up getting a collect call from my biological father that night, and he was in jail. And she had a conversation with him. He was pretty angered that she was going out,
Mhm.
and what she was wearing. She was dressed like a 19-year-old that's going to go out. Okay.
Mhm.
She hung up the phone on him, and she ended up saying goodbye to me, and she left. Now, yeah, so she was supposed to meet Lynn at the Diamond Club, and she never showed up.
Okay.
My mom never showed up. Yeah.
There's a bit of time that passes from her not showing up to her actually being reported missing, because I believe it was the people who were babysitting you that reported her missing. Was it not days later?
Yes. So Kathy and Chris ended up holding on to me for about 3 days,
Wow.
and they went to one of my great aunt's houses, who Valerie was close to, and knocked on the door and was like, "Hey, like, we're watching Robyn. Valerie hasn't come back. It's been 3 days. We haven't heard from her. And, like, I got to go to work, and I don't know what's going on here. Can you take Robyn?" And my aunt was like, "What?" So she ended up taking me in, and I was apparently a mess,
I
like
bet.
dirty and everything. Two teenagers that weren't parents were looking after me. And she got on the phone, and she ended up calling my parents
Mhm.
who raised me. And she was like, "They dropped Robyn off, and they said Valerie hasn't been home. What do I do?" And they said, "Call the police right away." So
And
that's how it was reported.
wow. And just to remind me one more time, your parents who raised you, the biological relationship is, it's your great aunt and great uncle, so like your biological grandparents.
My biological mother's, so Valerie's aunt and uncle.
Okay, all right. That's sorry.
Yeah,
When you get into like second aunt and all that stuff, I find it's so complicated to figure out.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, it's
Okay.
confusing.
3 days after she's gone missing, that the police even get involved, and it's at this time I'm sure your family is preoccupied with dealing with you as the baby, but also at the same time, like, where is Valerie? I'm thinking the initial thought probably would have been more something like, she was just out on the town and, doing something and made a bad decision to leave you with the babysitters or something. Or do you know if, like, it's hard for me to tell going back with reading news reports, but what I wonder is if the thought initially was, wow, like something horrible must have happened to Valerie, or was the thought, Valerie is, doing something, irresponsible by leaving Robyn. Do you have any idea?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So my family was completely alarmed.
Mhm,
She would have never left me for that long without checking in and actually physically coming in and checking on me.
mhm,
I've heard stories where she would, go on day trips and she would make people turn around and come pick me up.
mhm,
She had a lot of anxiety being away from me. Maybe it was postpartum. Um, but yeah, so immediately they were absolutely alarmed
mhm.
and it was unlike her to disappear.
Mhm. Okay. And now that kind of catches me up to some of the news reports because when I read back to a lot of like newspaper clippings and such from the time that your biological mother was being searched for as a missing person, a lot of those articles and posts and stuff that I seen, you as a baby are sitting there on your biological mother's father's, knee as he's speaking to the news and whatnot. And that was one of the things where when I was wondering like how you managed to evade finding out about all of this stuff. I guess you were young enough that you never thought to Google your name or other family members' names because you probably would have eventually put it together. But all that to say is there were many articles written about the search for the 19-year-old mother Valerie who went missing after a night out on the town in Toronto. There seemed to be no signs or evidence or any trail left behind because of course in 89 this would have predated everyone having cell phones and security cameras being all over the place where they could have tracked her. It didn't seem like there was any evidence whatsoever as to what may have happened to her, where she may have went, who she may have been with. I would have thought that the investigation would have probably turned towards her friends and those close to her. Do you know if any of her close friends or any of the people associated with her early on were thought to be suspects or involved? Or do you have any idea of that aspect of the investigation?
Absolutely. So a lot of people were interviewed, family members, neighbors, her friends, obviously her friends that were watching me that night. The friend Lynn that she was supposed to meet up with at the nightclub. Everybody was interviewed, and um, a lot of my family did blame and still does blame Kathy and Chris.
Mhm.
Um, just because of how things played out after,
Yeah,
they do believe that they have some involvement.
keeping you for 3 days is definitely suspicious. I'm just thinking if I'm putting myself in their shoes, even if I was, younger, 16, 17, 18, 19, I would have I would be able to come up with the decision of, "I'm babysitting and mom didn't come home. I'm not looking after her baby for 2 or 3 days waiting around." Like, I just that to me seems like a really weird decision, and I just can't imagine making that decision, and I can only imagine when the police officer looked at the case and thought like, "Whoa, you kept the baby for 3 days before you did anything?" Like, that definitely seems suspicious, but aside from all of these people being interviewed, did it go much further than that? Because I guess your mom was a missing person, although this went on for several years before the big development that we'll talk about. Do you know if it ever got close to like an arrest or charges being laid against anyone? Do you have any information on that?
I don't think it was close enough to arrest anyone. I know that they were very suspicious of her dad, my grandfather that was holding me in the news photos.
Oh,
They were suspicious of him. I know Paul Bernardo was also a suspect, as that's kind of where a lot of his crimes started.
yeah, right around this same area and around the same time. Exactly, exactly.
Exactly, and we ended up finding out that they kinda hung out with some of the same crowds, but to our knowledge, they never actually met. He was cleared. He was in Florida when she went missing,
Oh.
and there's extensive proof, credit card records, surveillance, all of that. So, he was a one-time suspect.
Mhm.
Um they do look at her friends a little funny, of course, because why would you hold a child for 3 days? And her friend Lynn, who was supposed to meet her at the club, some events had turned out and she looked kind of suspicious. She was caught in a couple of lies, but nothing enough to criminally arrest them.
Okay.
Yeah.
The big development will come about three years later when your mother will no longer be considered a missing person because she's actually found in a rural area outside of Toronto, I believe by hunters, just happened upon her by chance. What is the story? Like what happened?
So the story with that was when she went missing, nobody was looking around that area. She was known to hate the country.
Mhm.
And when she stayed with my parents, before she had me, they were in Mississauga then. She even thought that was the country and she hated it. So my family was like, there is no way that she just decided, oh yeah, I'm gonna go out to the country, you know.
Mhm.
Um, there has been witnesses stepping forward in Burford at a local trailer park there who believe that they did see my mom, Lynn, and Lynn's then friend, I believe her name was Laura or Lori, um, getting out of a white or cream color boat like car at the trailer park. There were parties going on at the trailer park as well. So when the girls stepped out, they were dressed in high heels and mini skirts, and all the people in the trailer park were wearing t-shirts and flip-flops. So
They stood out. And you said Lynn, is that the young woman that she was meeting to go dancing with?
yes.
Okay, all right. I didn't know any what you're saying now is all new to me. So I didn't realize there was even a possible link to anywhere in this remote area. Was it Brantford is where this is happening?
Burford,
Burford.
yes,
Okay.
which is just beside each other. Yeah.
Okay.
So obviously nobody ever came forward. Previously they were looking around Toronto. They never thought that she would have been out that way.
Mhm.
Um, there was also when she was discovered, and you are correct, Jordan, she was discovered by hunters.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up being in contact with one of the hunters after the first article that I was involved with the Brantford paper.
Mhm.
Um, he had came forward and got in contact with me. He was one of the hunters who had found her,
Oh, wow.
and he told me how it happened. And him and his friend, his dog went up ahead and was cutting through the bush area. It was like a forest, marshy bush area,
Mhm.
and the dog ended up bringing back a part of human remains, like skeleton.
Oh,
And
wow.
they were just like, wait, what is that? So, you know, got the dog to show, hey, where'd you get that from? And they found a skull, they found bones, and they absolutely freaked out.
I bet.
Um, it was just a gravel road then, so they took a stick and marked on the gravel, like, where they came out of the forest, and they both walked a really long way to the closest gas station to call the police.
Mhm. It always amazes me when you hear of a hunter finding something in the woods like this. Like the chances that they walk, somewhere that brings them this close to something like that. It's kind of a miracle that anyone has found in the forest like that. But in your mom's case, it wasn't immediately identified as her. This was another thing that surprised me is they did a skeletal reconstruction to try to figure out what the skull would have looked like when it was your mom, and they put a photo in the paper, I believe. But it was very quickly after that that someone came forward and said, like, that those remains that you found look a lot like Valerie Stevens, and that's how they put it together. Like someone came forward and from a newspaper article or something.
Yeah, there was the configure of, this is what we think she looks like.
Yeah, you see those, but
My
yeah,
mom didn't she didn't really look like it, but it was enough for our family to be like, okay, like the hair color, maybe the eye shape is similar. Let's call it in.
yeah. I guess regardless, we're missing our daughter, who's about the same age as the person you found. Close enough. Let's take a look. But it ended up. I think they confirmed it through like dental records or something
Yes,
like
they
that. But
did. Yeah, she had a partial root canal done,
Okay.
and under a year prior to her going missing. So they were able to match the dental
Mhm.
records.
But, aside from, like, finding, like, skeletal remains and I believe, like, some articles of clothing, like maybe one of her shoes, but they weren't able to figure out or there wasn't enough information or evidence there to figure out how she died or where. Like, that was 3 years had passed, so it's still unknown what her actual cause of death was.
Yeah, absolutely. When she was found, as I said, there was skeletal remains. There was a white ankle boot, which was like really fashion forward for back then.
Yeah.
The other one was missing. She was known to have a purse with her at all times. The purse was nowhere in sight. Nobody's ever found it. Her keys, lipstick, a wallet, nothing. Um, Nothing was ever retrieved from her except the boot, and they ended up finding pieces of clothing because she was found. So she went out that night wearing a skirt when she left, and when she was found, she was in black acid wash jeans. So the jean material, as you know, like around the top and the zipper and the buckle, it's pretty thick.
Mhm.
So it was able to withstand 3 full seasons, um, like, of the year, and, so they were able to be like, "Hey, this is the kind of pants she was wearing." There was also a man who came forward when she was found, and not many people know this, but it's fine to say. He had come forward to the police and said, "Hey, I think that lady knocked on my door right around that time, and it was about 2, 3 years ago. She asked to use my phone." So the police went there, they gave him an interview, and back then they couldn't get any sort of phone records um, after 3 years,
Mhm.
right?
Of course, yeah.
So nothing was able to be pulled, and they actually put him under hypnosis, which is not done anymore,
Wow.
really.
Oh, yeah,
They
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and everything that he said, like, they were like, "What did she look like from head to toe? What did she sound like? What did she say?" And she ended up asking him. It was about, I would say, about 8 o'clock at night, and September 9th, and she ended up asking him, like, "Can I use your phone?" And I believe he had a wife with him, and so they let her in. She used the phone in the bedroom because she wanted privacy,
Mhm.
and she came out, and she was just like, "Is there any way that you could drive me to Toronto?" And he was like, "Toronto?" He's like, "It is late." He was a farmer, so eight
Mhm.
o'clock is very late, right?
And this man who came forward, he was from the area where she was like, the
Yeah.
Burford area?
Yes. Yeah, he
Oh,
was actually not too far from where her body was found, and also not too far away from the trailer park.
okay.
So, as I said, they put him under hypnosis, and they had witnessed her tattoos. He described her, said she was beautiful. She was a beautiful woman. Described the tattoo on her arm, which was a heart and it had my name in it. So everything she was wearing, he was able to pull up. And him and his wife looked out the window at my mom walking down the concession roads, and they were kind of like, "Should we call the police? Because she seems young and she's lost," it kind of seems like. And she was on somebody, or just backing up on someone's property at a fence, and she was playing with their dog as she was walking by and stuff and trying to pet it. And then a pickup truck pulled out and just up the road, and then she ended up waving. The truck pulled over, and she talked to the driver, and then she went around and she got into the passenger seat. And the
Wow.
truck is described as like a dark blue, loud muffler, almost like a broken down type of pickup truck.
A kind of truck you'd see in rural Ontario. But this is kind of putting some things together because I guess maybe this truck was someone she knew and she hopped in. If this sighting is legitimate, it could have been someone she knew and she hopped in. But I also know that your mom's case was added to a collection of cases that were assigned to something called the Green Ribbon Task Force, which was a task force that the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, put together that investigated a series of murders in the area that involved hitchhikers. Like there was a reason, they had a reason to believe that someone was preying on young hitchhikers in Ontario over a period of several years, and your mom's case was one of the ones considered in that. And I often thought there wasn't anything that really, like, if she was going to a bar in Toronto, why would she be hitchhiking in Toronto? But maybe it is this possible lead and sighting of her that made it look more like she was possibly hitchhiking to get back to Toronto.
Yes.
Possibly.
So our family thinks now that she wasn't hitchhiking out of Toronto. We feel that she might have gotten into the car because maybe Lynn was there and was like, hey, change of plans, and all this stuff, because nobody ever came forward ever seeing her at the club or any of that sort. And so we think that she willingly got into the car and they ended up driving to Brantford. And yeah, and as you said, they got it kind of backwards because she was hitchhiking trying to come home.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about Alan Craig McDonald? Because the pickup truck is what kind of led them to him.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, tell me about Alan Craig McDonald.
So, as I was saying earlier, when she was seen by the farmer and his wife, they witnessed her walking down the concession and waving down a pickup, and spoke to the driver and got in. The detectives ended up I don't know how many years it took, but they ended up thinking that the pickup truck belonged to Alan Craig McDonald, which was, he was convicted of 2 murders in Nova Scotia, one being a police officer and then a cab driver who was a witness. And this was back in the 1970s, late 1970s, give or take. And he ended up serving only 12 years in prison. And he was let out early. And he decided to pick Ontario and Brantford to go into a halfway house. And the truck that they believe my mom got into matched what he drove around in town.
Wow, what a strange connection to Nova Scotia, first of all, but the fact that in this small rural area there is a convicted killer who's driving a similar vehicle that your mom was likely last seen getting into. But we're obviously he's going to become a suspect. Where does that go?
So I don't know exactly when it was where they kind of connected him. I first sat down with an OPP detective when I was about 20, and my cousin was there with me, and she was raised with my mom as well. And he sat me down, and it's funny because he was actually one of the original OPP detectives just when it happened. It was really cosmic that he was one of the original ones. He came out to Toronto and he spoke with me and my cousin and told us about Alan Craig McDonald, and also how, the crimes that he did and how he only served 12 years. And then in 2006, they ended up tying his DNA to a woman named Linda Shaw. And I believe she was found dead in Woodbridge area. And she was attending university, and he was more of like an opportunist, and he ended up taking her life. And I think it was about around the same year where my mom was found, if not a year before. He was never convicted of her murder, unfortunately. I do feel extremely bad too for her family, because he decided to kill himself in a phone booth while on the phone on a payphone with his probation officer. He was on the run from police, and just outside of Brantford, some other rural area, for petty theft, and the police were chasing him, and he got scared and ended up taking his own life in the phone
Wow.
booth.
Yeah,
I think that was 1995.
yeah, and then several years later, using DNA, they connected him to this prior murder. So I guess he's never been able to be ruled out as being connected to your biological mother's murder.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. What a strange twist. Now, one part of the story that I want to get into is I know later in life, as you're researching your biological mom's death and the investigation into the crime that ended her life, you kind of took it a bit further, and you became close with a lot of people associated with the story. Can you tell me a bit about what you were able to learn, maybe what surprised you or what made you feel horrible about meeting people this closely connected to your biological mom's death?
So once I had asked my great aunt, do you know who my biological father is? She ended up changing her tone and she's like, yeah, this is his name. I
Mhm.
ended up looking him up in the white pages back then.
Okay.
The first name I picked out, I called. And I was at my friend's house in my building, my parents' building that time. And I'm just like, you know what? Here goes nothing. I called and a man picked up and I was like, hi, may I please speak to Brian? And he is like speaking. I'm like, hey, this is gonna sound really weird, but did you know someone named Valerie who died back in like she went missing in 1989? He was like, no, seriously, who the fuck is this? I'm like, I'm her daughter. I'm Robyn. He's like, Robyn? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, hi, I'm your dad, Brian. And I was like, what? Like, it was, I swear, I probably turned white as snow. It was just so surreal. Um, I did have contact with him on and off throughout the years. He had other children with other women.
Mhm.
He's not the best role model. I did end up finding out that he tried to get custody of me when she went missing, but given his criminal record,
Mhm.
as I said, he was already in jail when she went missing.
Jeez. Okay. Yeah.
And he had, I believe, a domestic charge, or my mom had a domestic charge on him
Mhm.
for violence. And so the courts were like, buddy, you're crazy if you think
Yeah.
we're going to give you a baby.
Yeah.
And then through that, I ended up finding out a lot of things. I ended up finding out about Valerie's friend Lynn and a couple other friends. I found Lynn on Facebook, and it's so ironic because she lived in the same city as me then too.
Wow, okay. And again, just to remind people, Lynn is who she was meeting at the club, and Lynn was also who it was thought that she may have been at this trailer park party area with as well. So certainly, like whatever happened to your mom, if this whole trailer park thing in Bearford or however you say it is true, Lynn is in the middle of it.
Oh, absolutely. She denies ever being part of it. She had told me, like at first she was like, to my knowledge, because it was just through Facebook, she seemed happy to speak with me.
So you just
And
sent her a message or something.
yeah, yeah, and then we ended up talking on the phone, but there were some things that she said, and I went back to the detective, like, she was like, "I was waiting outside the Diamond Club for a long time, and I used the payphone, and I ended up calling your mom's house, and Kathy picked up, and Kathy said your mom left." So, when I told the detective that, he knew I was kinda playing her side to get some info, and, he ended up looking into it and called me back and was like, this is insane that she said that to you because there is no calls coming in or out except the collect call from your father,
Mm.
biological father, from the jail that night. So I don't know why she's saying that she called the house. And she also told me that my mom would have left in a skirt with a white plastic bag with black jeans in them because she was going to give them back to her friend Laura, which was Lynn's friend.
Hmm.
So, and those are the same jeans that she was found dead in.
Huh.
So it definitely sparked the detective's interest of, okay, so we're catching her in lies, but unfortunately not enough for a confession. And, we can't do anything about
Yeah.
it.
I think even remembering the color of the jeans in the bag and stuff, that's a very specific memory to have. And we're talking about something, you're talking to her 15, 20 years later. To remember that, yeah, I don't know, because it should have been inconsequential at that night if that was the case.
And even the detective said she never told us that she left with a plastic bag. What is she saying?
Mhm.
So we did catch her in a couple of things. Once I think when she started feeling that I was kind of like not really on her side and I was more so questioning her, she got totally freaked out and she like backed off
Mm.
and was like, she ended up saying the words of before our fallout. She said, just shortly after your mom went missing, I was sleeping in my room and my CD player turned on and it skipped to I think she said number 7. And she was like, that was your mom's favorite song. She's like, I don't understand why she was haunting me.
Mm.
But if it was someone you cared about, wouldn't it be visiting you? Why is she haunting you?
Yeah, that is a weird word to use. Yeah. Hmm.
I definitely feel that her friends know a lot more than what they had let on. They are well in their 50s, maybe even touching 60s now. And I feel that it's time that they come forward. I am not saying that, they held a gun to our head and they're the ones who pulled the trigger. Not at all. I don't know what they were hiding. I don't know if they were doing drugs or any illegal activity and they were scared. Um, to come forward back then, honestly, there probably wouldn't be any repercussions. I just want to find out what had happened, um, as it's been so long, and I am the main person in my family who has been digging into this,
Mhm.
and it's not been easy because some of my family members, it's painful for them to talk about. They don't want to relive it. My grandma, Valerie's mom, her and I have a very strained relationship, and me bringing up Valerie to her is very hurtful. She went through a lot with
Mhm.
her then ex-husband, which was Valerie's father, um, who she's been divorced from for many years.
Mhm.
Um, it was just a lot. So it was kind of hard to talk to my family. So I had to
Mhm.
kind of grab at outer sources like her friends.
Yeah. I don't know if you can explain this, but why do you think, for you, why is it so important to have like the mystery solved? And, whether you want to use the word justice or just like truth and what happened to your mom, what do you think it is that makes that so important for you? And I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I just think like such a part of your story and your background, it's so complicated as a result of your mom's murder and death. Like, does it maybe make that stuff make more sense, or is it just the fact that your mom is just 19 at the beginning of her life, and to have this happen? Like, what do you think it is? Why is this so important?
I think it's all of it. I feel like it was definitely an injustice.
Mhm.
I know that she, had a bunch of seedy friends. She grew up on the streets a lot. She was kicked out when she was 16, by her mother and her new stepfather. And she had a really hard life, and that's why I don't hold anything against her.
Mhm.
She was a kid raising a baby, and she had a lot of mental health issues that she had to work out. Um, but I absolutely feel that it is important for me. I can't speak for the rest of my family, but it's important for me to find out what had happened as it absolutely affected my whole entire life.
Absolutely.
And I want to be able to tell my kids one day, hey, you know, this case is solved. Now we know we can understand what happened to Grandma Valerie and myself and, my other family members, we can start to heal.
Because I guess without it, there's almost like this house of cards within your family, all as a result of your biological mom's murder. Everyone had to kind of change roles, take on other responsibilities. There's all these secrets that are being kept or were being kept. Having it solved and knowing what happened, at least gives you like at least you know what the problem is rather than it just being this big gray mystery. And as a mom yourself, like you have three kids, given everything you've grown up with and all the things you've had to deal with, even in this phone call, you've told me about several experiences where I couldn't possibly imagine dealing with this, from calling your biological father that time to this meeting and then going to Jurassic Park with your friend. How has it changed how you mother your kids?
I definitely feel that it has
Yeah, but there's no way it couldn't.
affected
Yeah.
me.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I'm very careful with my children. I am very watchful. I am very monitoring, not overly, but um, I'm really careful about who my friends are too,
Mm.
and what people I bring around my children and what environment they're being raised in. I do feel that it has given me some anxieties. I have, like, sometimes the worst case scenarios when
Mhm.
my kids are out doing things. I'm like, "Oh my god, but what if this happens? And how about if somebody takes them?" Like,
Mhm.
so it has absolutely affected me in that sort of way. I feel like it did, on a positive note, make me the mother who I am today in spite of everything that had happened. It has always pushed me to do my best and to show up and to be there in every sort of way and to fulfill the shoes that my mother wasn't able to do.
Mm. Is there any
Okay.
other parts of this you wanna get into?
Yeah, absolutely. So my grandfather, who was all in the newspapers, Randy Stevens, um, he was all for show. When they ended up finding her body, he went to the funeral home. He started making arrangements. He wanted to have control over everything. And that's how he was when she was alive. He was abusive, controlling. When the police went into her apartment, her townhome, to investigate, there was a bunch of stuff already missing. My IDs were missing, like my health card, my birth certificates, her new TV set, her new stereo system was missing within just a day of it being reported.
Wow.
When Kathy and Chris dropped me off, "Hey, Valerie
Mhm.
hasn't come home. It's been 3 days. I got to go to work. Here's Robyn." After she called them, she did hold on to me for a few days, but then Brandy, my grandfather, came in and wanted me. And right away, my family was alarmed because they knew his history with my mom and, what a piece of shit he was to his kids, his wife. They were absolutely alarmed.
Mhm.
Nobody was able to really take me in due to financial struggles or their family situation. My parents that raised me were the most fit in the family to take me on. So once they found out that, Brandy was going to have custody of me, that's when my parents stepped in and they were like, "I think the fuck not."
Wow.
So my parents stepped in and battled him, and it costed them thousands of dollars.
Mhm.
He got free lawyers through low income services. My parents had to pay out of pocket for every time he dragged them there. The first initial court date, he ended up saying, "Well, I should be able to take her." This is Randy,
Mhm.
right? "I should be able to take her. Look, I have her ID." And my parents were like, "Her ID?" And then they ended up, figuring out. "So you went into her house, you broke in, and you stole Robyn's ID." And he did it deliberately to get custody of me.
Wow.
Because
Okay.
when you get custody of a child, there's tax benefits.
Yeah.
And also, you get more tax benefits when you adopt. So he wanted me only for the money. So back and forth for a long time. My parents basically had to sneak me away as the court thing was going on. So my aunt who took me in when Kathy and Chris dropped me off,
Wow.
Brandy was holding on to me and would not give me up because he was scared my family was going to take me. So it was a long time. It was like months before I saw anybody. And she was like, my aunt was just like, like the family misses her, can she just come over and stuff like that? And he was like, yeah, I guess so. And he was an alcoholic and he was the scum of the scum.
Wow.
And he drove me over here. He was like, yeah, here, take her for a couple hours, whatever. She ended up getting on the phone with my parents and was like, I got her, come.
Come.
So my parents came from Mississauga to Scarborough and ended up, actually, I think they were in Toronto then, and ended up grabbing me from them and was like, ha, we have her now, see you in court.
Hearing everything about your biological mother, Valerie's father, Randy, it just makes me think like the police likely would have been questioning him as well because he just doesn't sound like a great guy. Is there anything that connects him to even possibly being involved in what happened to Valerie?
The only alibi he had was his new wife,
Mhm.
and I mean, that's not sufficient enough because she
Yeah.
would have lied through her teeth. They were
Mhm.
actually charged in the paper. It was in the papers and everything. I could not find it, so I couldn't get my hands on it to send it to you. But they were charged for taking my mom's checks. I guess she was on welfare then, while she was gonna go back to school and all that. So in between, she was on welfare. So when she was missing, I don't know if it was, like, in her apartment or if she had a mailbox, I'm not sure,
Mhm.
but he ended up taking her checks and cashing them.
Wow.
His
Okay.
wife cashed them because she worked at a bank. So they were both charged.
Wow. Are they
Absolute pieces of shit.
are they still alive, the two of them?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay, so you're obviously you have nothing to do with them.
I have no desire to have a relationship with them. I
Yeah.
did reach out to him too, in my early 20s, and he ended up sending me an email. He spelt my name wrong, and he was like, "Oh, I remember pushing you on the swing when you were little, and I loved your mom," and da da da, just a whole bunch of bullshit. I didn't
Mhm.
believe any of it.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, don't even worry about it. I'll keep talking when he comes, we can stop 'cause I have everything I need. The only other thing I was about to ask is if you wanted to talk about l as you went through, like, all the difficult family dynamics being tossed around this little battle to keep you and where you were going to go as a kid, how does this all change the way you feel about your actual mom and dad who raised you? Like, are you thankful for what they did and what they saved you from?
I am absolutely thankful to them because I could have, had a horrible life with my grandfather, and it would have just been a repeat of what he did to my mother.
Mhm.
So I will forever be grateful. And I didn't go into the foster system because they were concerned they wanted to keep me with family. So like I said, I'm forever grateful. I do, however, have like some trauma
Yeah,
and
that
stuff, and I feel like it did affect me growing up. Me and my mom who raised me butt heads quite a bit into my, mid to late teens. It became problematic. It was a lot of resentment,
mhm,
um, and stuff, and just things I had to figure out in my early 20s and to work through.
mhm, yeah, yeah, and the reason I wanted to ask that at the end is because when we talked about how they handled telling you and stuff, we were not to say critical, but the way we talked about that, I think I definitely wanna end with, "But this could have been so much worse," and I think, like, is it fair to say they did their best with a bad situation? Like, would you say that?
Um, I say they did their best in a bad situation and for what they knew. It's easy to sit here and be like, "I would have handled it different," um with me not being in their situation. I feel like there are certain things that could have been handled different, but all in all, I am very grateful. I am very thankful that I was basically saved.
I want to thank you for joining Robin and I for this episode of Nighttime. Now, before I end this episode, I want to call out to anyone who has any information related to the murder of Valerie Stevens. This case isn't unsolvable, and it's likely just a tip away from breaking. You can share your information by reporting it anonymously at 1-800-222-8477 or by contacting Ontario Provincial Police Detective Sean Webb at 519-442-2242. If you have information, do the right thing, and let's help answer Robyn's questions. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I have some thanks to pass out. First, a huge and sincere thank you to Robyn for sharing her story with us during this episode. I'd like to give a big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. On the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Jennifer, Nicole, and Jamie, we appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can do it in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those new episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. And until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.